This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon van Dorpen. I'm a competition and industrial policy reporter at POLITICO. And in this panel, we will discuss the agility of competition as a policy tool in reaction to recent shocks that have impacted the European economy. We think, of course, of the coronavirus pandemic and the war in Ukraine, two events that have triggered a call for state support to businesses and for increased cooperation between these companies. The European Commission has, in response, relaxed its state aid and antitrust rules, too much for some, not enough for others. And in parallel, the Commission has devised and updated its new industrial strategy. That document was first published on the 10th of March 2020, one day before the WHO declared the coronavirus a pandemic, and has been updated in May last year. The focus has shifted towards the resilience of the European economy, and the update was followed by a slate of legislative proposals, including the European Chips Act, which seeks to strengthen the continent's semiconductor supply chain. State aid has proven the main instrument in the competition portfolio to respond to these developments, but the increased flexibility is worrying smaller EU countries who want to preserve a level playing field, and environmental associations who are concerned the subsidies will flow to polluting businesses. To discuss these and other topics, we have a stellar panel of competition and industry experts. Joining us online are Gisela Höhensee, Deputy Director General for European Policies at the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Hi, Gisela. And Fabrice Le Sachet, Vice President at Mouvement des Entreprises de France, the largest employer federation in France. Hello, Fabrice.
Hello, good morning.
And with me in the room are Carl Sukup, one of the European Commission's most renowned state aid experts, and Maria Klaes-Walravens, Head of Energy System and State Aid at environmental law charity ClientEarths. May I also remind the audience of the possibility to ask questions using the Swapcard app, and for tweet we use the hashtag #PoliticoCompetition. Let's jump right into the discussion, and let me start with you, Carl. How do you evaluate this busy period so far, and do you think that it will have lasting changes? I believe some people have expressed concerns that state aid has been weak in state aid policy, and with several temporary frameworks and other, for example, in the CHIPS Act, more state aid has been made possible. How do you look back at this period and anticipate the lasting changes?
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. A very short answer would be I would not expect lasting changes. I think it was clear to us from the beginning of the COVID crisis that we would need to use all the flexibility which the state aid rules allow for anyhow, and that the existing toolbox in terms of frameworks and guidelines would not be sufficient in this respect. But we have in the treaty from its beginning clauses which allow for this flexibility. There's 107(2)(b) and 3(b), which were already used in the financial crisis. So we made use of this very quickly in the COVID crisis by setting up the already mentioned temporary framework. which provides for ample opportunities to support businesses in the crisis, and in particular operating aid, which is a kind of aid which we normally consider very carefully because it is highly distortive. That's also why it's important that these rules are temporary. And as already the Executive Vice President said, we are very happy that now these rules are phasing out by the end of this month. So in about 2 weeks' time, the 90% of the COVID temporary framework will cease to apply. And this is important because we don't want companies to rely on operating support from the states on a long-term basis. This must be limited to really the times of the crisis. Unfortunately, Europe was hit by another crisis recently due to the aggression of Russia against the Ukraine, and we have developed again very quickly the temporary crisis framework. But also this is a temporary framework. It will be in place as long as needed, but as short as possible. When we come then to other developments, you mentioned the CHIPS Act. I would say that state aid has always been a flexible instrument. We have been reviewing and evaluating our toolbox every few years. Last big review was in 2014, the state aid modernization, and we are currently in the process of another big review. And this is always taking place against the background of developing EU policies and EU priorities. So the main driver in this respect, of course, is the twin green and digital transition, but also the industrial policy and open strategic autonomy play a role. So I think in this respect, this is not really something new. It is adapting the regulatory state aid framework to the EU policies and requirements.
Gisela, an opening question for you. What are Germany's priorities for EU competition policy in response to these shocks? And could you perhaps distinguish between the short and the longer term?
Yes, I mean, we have seen in the crisis, in the pandemic crisis, and now we see it in the crisis with the Russia's aggression to Ukraine, that the state aid law is proven to be very flexible, that it evolves, that it adapts to the situation, and also that member states and the Commission act very swiftly to react to all these challenges. And I think we did it in a very, very good way. We also, and I think I can echo more or less Karl Sukup, what he said, just I think we also feel that it's very necessary that the temporary frameworks have a limitation. I think this is of utmost importance so that we really avoid and prevent excessive competition distortions. So I think we are on a good way, and I don't think that we will have lasting changes or necessity of lasting changes to the state aid framework. I think we are on a very good course, and I think we should stay there. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria, ClientEarths lawyers have been following this debate closely. What do you expect, or what does your organization expect policymakers to focus on in this debate?
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, we are an organization which are focusing on the environment, climate, biodiversity, etc. So for us, it's really important also that the state aid rules, which are rules dealing with policies, because state aid is a policy, and therefore are very powerful rules, because the Commission approving or not approving aid means that either something positive maybe might come about, or even if the aid that is approved is harmful for the environment, it can have long-lasting effects for the environment. So I think for us at the moment, what we would like to see a little bit more maybe is that also in these temporary frameworks, which we believe are quite important as well, but that there is some more regard also for these effects on the environment, considering that the temporary frameworks are not just only compensating for the damage that's happened, but there is also something a little bit more in there. It is important also that there's a forward-looking way of looking at it and really kind of attaching conditions maybe of improving the businesses so they become more environmental friendly.
Do you see currently a lack of such forward-looking policy?
Yes, I see this a little bit, in particular also because when we talk about environmental aid, we very often only focus on the CEAG, and we very often look at aid really from the point of view, okay, if the measure itself has an environmental purpose or an energy purpose, only then it falls within the CAG, and then the rules within the CAG, which I think have improved enormously in the past, there are still some things to do better, are applying. But the moment the aid goes outside of this, and the aid is measured, for example, on the basis of a temporary framework, or is measured according to other guidelines, we don't have this anymore. We don't have the same environmental regard to it, while at the same time we are talking about economic activities that are having an effect on the environment. We are talking about economic activities, for example, which under normal circumstances would be assessed under the CAG, but now will fall under the temporary framework, or which, because they deal with a firm in difficulty, are assessed under the rescue and restructuring guidelines. And if you don't then have a certain cohesion, this, for us, is very damaging. It's very harmful because you get kind of already different decisions. You will have, for example, a situation where a company which is also investing in gas in Romania, but which is in difficulties and therefore is assessed under the rescue and restructuring guidelines, the aid is approved without further conditions, while there are now much stricter conditions under the CEAG with regard to lock-in of gas, etc., that are not taken into consideration. And that creates disparities, that creates for us also a distortion, again, even more of competition, but it's also quite damaging for the environment, and the long-term effects we see are very damaging.
Thank you. Let me perhaps clarify that the CEAG are the European Commission's state aid guidelines, which have just been reformed earlier this year and apply in normal times. Fabrice, turning to you, how have you been following the past few years and the response of competition regulators in Europe, and what are the priorities for businesses in this regard?
Thank you. First of all, maybe just to say that competition is a topic that we follow very closely, and I think the philosophy of competition has changed, and it's a good thing in Europe. We are not only having a view on consumers, which are very important to protect, but we also now have a view on Europe that needs to produce wealth, goods. We don't have a view of competition that is only within Europe, but we have a view on competition that is at a global scale. And that should help this evolution to create a larger European group. You know that in France we had this, and also with Germany, this Alstom, Siemens merger that was not going through because of the competition law, and also because the protection of consumers, because of the pricing analysis in Europe. But the market of railway and trains is global. The competitor in China is 4 times the size of Siemens turnover, of Alstom turnover. He's fully doped with state subsidies. He is in a position of monopoly in his own market, and he's coming to Europe. If we have only a European view of this topic, I think we missed something. And I think that we think that Europe has changed on this theme, on this topic of competition, and that's a good thing. Then for the COVID, I hear what the other panelists said, and I have to say that the European Union, in our view, has been very effective in supporting the economy, on supporting the corporations. And obviously, we cannot run in the long term on public money, that's for sure. We cannot be addicted to public money. We cannot go to public money every time there is a problem. We have gone from one crisis to another one, but they are very different crises. And I have to say that the support package for the COVID, that was really instrumental, that has been very effective, is not so much effective regarding the energy price and the current crisis. And the companies, I think in France and in Europe in general, are hit much more severely by this inflation of energy prices. So maybe there is something to fix here to help and support the companies in this very difficult moment. This inflation is, of course, fed by many factors. There is all these support plans that feed the inflation, but there are also the energy situation, the carbon pricing, and this is long-term inflation, the housing market, and we need to work on all these fields to make sure that we tackle the question of inflation. Today, our biggest fear is obviously the recession and the interest rate going up, having a problem to finance, to support the debt. And you know that in France, especially, our debt has gone up very significantly. And so we have a question of repayment of the debts, of interest rates, and the burden of these interest rates. So maybe a last word on this climate agenda or environmental agenda. Fully agree with the panelists before me that said that we need to accelerate, but not fully aligned on the fact that the money that is spent right now, all the support plan shall also target environment, because when someone is in the water, someone is close to die, you don't have criteria to take him back on the boat. I think we should do more on environment, but that should be considered, in our view, as a different track than the support package to face COVID, for instance, or to face not energy, because energy here, there is an opportunity for energy transition. But when we speak about COVID, it's a rescue package. When we speak about energy or environment, it should be other tracks, other line of financing, not only public money, and moreover, agnostic in technology. I heard about gas, about renewable. We should just give a target of emissions, and then the corporations, the innovation, shall do the job with the best available technology at the least cost. And this is very important for us, not to have ideology on technology, but to let every technology get its own path and let also the private sector takes the risk.
Thank you, Fabrice. Yes, a lot of interesting elements for the other panelists immediately. Carl, let me start with you on what Fabrice said on the Ukraine framework, which should not be a copy-paste of the COVID framework, and I believe several people and governments have already voiced similar criticism, and we also heard that the European Commission is currently consulting countries on new changes to that framework. Could you say anything about what will likely feature in any update, and if you agree with what Fabrice has said?
Well, let me start by saying that first, I think we could spend the next half an hour, of course, also discussing Siemens Alstom and why the Commission was right in prohibiting this merger, and why it's not correct that we are blindly looking only at European markets and European competitors. But on your question. It's also interesting to hear on the one side that the debt level of the member states become higher and higher and more difficult to refinance, and on the other side the calls for even more support for companies, because it's clearly these two issues are linked to each other, and it also reminds us of the fact that taxpayers' money is not endless, and therefore everything which is paid to support companies also need to be raised somewhere and need to be financed somehow. As regards the Ukraine framework, it is not simply a copy-paste. There are three sections which I copy-paste more or less from the COVID framework, but there is an important last section in the temporary crisis framework, which is expressly made in order to compensate companies for strongly increased electricity and gas prices. And there, of course, it was very important to find the right balance, because what we do not want is that member states are compensating companies for all the increase of energy prices in the last year, because part of these price signals are very important if we want to drive our green agenda. I think part of the incentives from these higher prices is exactly what is also wanted in order to further the green transition. But we also see that there are price increases which are not part of these price signaling, but which are simply due to the Russian aggression. And there it is, I think, correct that member states are also helping companies. So this is a specific part aimed at the Ukraine situation. We have launched, I think it was on the 31st of May, a survey with member states to seek their input on whether they consider that the temporary crisis framework is working well, whether it's sufficient, whether there are gaps, and if there are gaps, what are these gaps? We have not received feedback from all member states yet, but from the majority of member states, and we're currently in the process of evaluating this feedback and then to see whether changes are necessary to the crisis framework, and if so, which ones. But then I think once we have done this evaluation, we are, as we were already with the original adoption, we can act quickly in order to make necessary changes.
Gisela, what are Germany's views on this Ukraine framework and how it might need to be reformed? I do not hear Gisela.
You don't hear me?
Yep, that was better.
Okay, it's better now. Do you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. I just started to say that in general, we support the temporary crisis framework. We think it works well. We added some suggestions concerning the pricing, the energy pricing, concerning also the green conditionalities. I think it's a good and very sufficient framework. But still, I mean, picking up at the question, do we have to do more for the green transition? And I think, yes, this is certainly a message I would like to convey. I just said that we are really happy with the way we tackled the crisis, the pandemic crisis, as well as the present crisis with the temporary frameworks, and they are a good instrument. And I also would like to say that we are very pleased with the climate, energy, and environmental aid guidelines. I think they are also give a very good framework and help for the transition. But still, I would like to point out, and having said this, that with respect to the green transition in the context of the European Green Deal, we see the need for further amendments because, I mean, the Green Deal is, or the green transition and also the digital transition is the main challenge of today and of the coming years. So we see that there is specifically a need in addition to the CEAG and to the general block exemption regulation and to the benefits of the temporary frameworks, we see a further need just to make amendments in the energy sector. And I think this should be discussed too. Thank you.
Could you clarify what kind of amendments that would be?
Yeah, I mean, we would see amendments in the in the tendering provisions. We would like to see in the decarbonization topic, and we would also see perhaps investments or facilitated investments for the power to heat plants. I think this, in very short, there are these are probably our main aspects we would like to add. And but we think in total we are on a very good path. And I mean, I think this is also the moment to say thank you to the Commission for their efforts they have shown really in the crisis. I mean, which lasts now really for a few years, and which is an unprecedented challenge for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if Maria or Carl, you want to respond to what Gisela said. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to react to the comment about the temporary framework, and in particular the question of, okay, it's difficult for companies, so we should not add additional criteria for the environment. I think that depends a little bit how the temporary framework is framed, and in particular also to what it leads. we have seen with regard to the temporary framework in COVID that it is not just up to the level of, okay, we are actually dealing with the damage to companies. It goes up, beyond that. The aid that is actually approved is more than just the damage. And if it is more than just the damage, and if it is more than just taking care that the company is kind of aided in this crisis, then we are talking about investments also for the future. And when we are talking about investments for the future, then that part needs to be linked to the environment as well. Everybody has been mentioning, also the Commission before, that this is an extremely important crisis as well. The climate crisis doesn't go away, the biodiversity crisis doesn't go away, and what we are doing now, every action we are taking now has an impact in the future. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. If I'm only covering damage, that might be fine, but the moment I go beyond that, I think it's absolutely fine for the Commission to attach conditions which are linked to the environment to improve the business.
Carl? Yeah.
No, I think I have quite some sympathy for this. No, I think where we talk about compensation aid, I think there's little scope for imposing conditions, because there it is to compensate for damage. But where we talk about investment support, I think there are good reasons why this investment support should also be in line with the EU priorities, and the green transition is one of the top priority, if not the top priority. As regards potential further facilitation related to investments into energy, into green energy, I hope. I think this might be part of the evaluation we are currently carrying out, also in view of the Repower communication in response to the Ukraine crisis, to see whether there further facilitation might be necessary, and if so, in which form.
Yeah, thank you. Fabrice, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to say that we fully agree. I was referring to compensation. Obviously, when we talk about investment, there is an alignment for targeting the climate transition, the environmental transition, because it's an economic transition, by the way. And so we are fully aligned. I just wanted to say that maybe I was not clear enough. For the COVID, we see a very effectiveness from the Commission. Regarding the support to face the energy price increase, we don't see an effectiveness. So far, most of the feedback we got from the ground, from big energy intensive users in France, from SMEs, from corporations that face this issue, they said that they are not matching any of the criteria. So I don't know if it's the level of France or if it's the Commission, but we have a serious problem to make sure that the support or the help for these companies goes to the ground. So for now, the feedback we have is that the companies are a little bit alone to face this. That's first point. Second point, we offered to reform, I know that it's not a consensus, but to reform the European energy market to maybe have less indexed to the gas price, which makes that price also skyrocketing. Third, we cannot continue to have a carbon market. It's very good that we have a carbon price signal, but the carbon price signal shall be previsible, shall be fixed over time, or at least we shall have a good view of this carbon price signal. If the price goes from 5 euro to 80 euro in 3 years' times, there is no company that can take this into account in the business plan. And we need some stability, or at least we need some visibility in order to lay down the investment with a financial model, with a financial plan. And last point, again, we should be agnostic in terms of technology. You, I'm sure, know that in France, we have a choice of nuclear that other countries maybe don't want, but it is our choice. And this nuclear, in terms of emissions, if we focus on emissions, is effective. I will not do the debate now about nuclear, but for us, it's, for instance, very important that in Europe, we can have a consensus also on the fact that the countries shall be able to choose the best what they consider to be the best technologies available to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 or even before if possible.
Thank you, Fabrice. Let me turn to a next chapter, which has already been raised with the Commissioner this morning as well, the important projects of common European interest. So there are a number of these projects. I believe 3 have been already approved by the European Commission, and a number others are still in the pipeline. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said in a speech last month that the project on hydrogen shall be approved by the summer. Carl, are your services still on track for that target? And what does by the summer mean?
We are certainly on track, and this depends on what by the summer means. But I think we will see around the coming months the adoption of the decisions on the first 2 IPCEIs on hydrogen. But I'm not going to give you a precise date, but of course our president is right.
And what are the priorities for the European Commission in the assessment of those many projects that you have received?
I think what we are talking about now are the first 2 IPCEIs hydrogen. We call them industry and technology because one is more focusing on new technologies for the production, etc. of hydrogen, and the other one is more focused on the industrial use and infrastructures. There are at least 2 more hydrogen IPCEIs in the making. One focused on infrastructure and the other one on mobility. What we are doing in these IPCEIs is several elements. I think the first element is the first important element is to ensure its innovativeness, because it's not about replicating things which already exist. So they must be of truly innovative nature. So this is very important. Then we are checking very carefully the integration, because the idea is not to support individual company projects, but company projects which help creating a European ecosystem in the hydrogen value chain. So we are checking the integration. We are checking spillover, because the effects of the IPCEI should clearly go beyond the participating member states and the participating companies. So this is also important, because we're talking about an important project of common European interest. And then a very strong focus, in particular from a competition angle, is of course on the funding gap. So about the amount of aid which is needed by the company in order to carry out the project. Where we're taking a very close look, and as the executive vice president said already in her intervention today, experience from the previous IPCEIs on batteries shows that companies some are overestimating the funds needed, and in the batteries our intervention led to the reduction by 30 to 40% of the aid needed, and therefore of taxpayers' money saved while the project is still going ahead. So I think these are the important elements, and the last one, which depends really on the sector, is of course the competitive analysis. So whether the projects are not leading to a situation where companies gain potentially market power or get into a situation where they can distort competition. So I think these would be the main elements from my perspective.
Yeah, thanks. Gisela, Germany has made a big priority also of these different projects. The one on hydrogen, could you perhaps explain what are Germany's main ambitions there? And then there's also a large IPCEI for semiconductors in the making. Could you indicate how that is advancing and how it also complements the possibilities created under the European Chips Act?
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, first of all, I'm really pleased to hear that the Commission will approve pretty soon the IPCEI hydrogen, because it is indeed, as you said, of great importance for the German government and from the German point of view. And this applies as well to the other IPCEIs which are in the pipeline. We are working quite intensively on it together with our partners. So I think we will see a lot of progress in the near future. But I mean, I would also like to add something as we see the IPCEIs in total. I mean, we think it's a great example for a truly European project and a truly European approach because it's really innovative. It follows a common European interest. It's highly ambitious, and this is also important. It prevents undue competition distortions. So I think IPCEI are a very valuable instrument, but on the other hand, it's not a remedy for all state aid measures. So we still are of the opinion that only such technologies can be funded which are beyond the so-called global state of the art. You could also call it market failure. So if there is a market failure, then we think there should be the instrument of IPCEIs should be used. So we should not only rely on IPCEIs, but we should also consider other options like the CEHG and the European Chips Act. They also should be considered where appropriate.
Is Germany in favor of extending the possibilities created under the CHIPS Act with regards to state aid to other sectors?
As I just said, we don't believe it's a remedy to all state aid measures, and I think we agree with the proposal of the regulation as it lies before us. I think that is for us a very good instrument. Thank you.
Thank you. Fabrice, I heard businesses in the past complaining about these IPCEIs in the sense that they're going slowly. Is that something that Medev has issues with, or yes, how do you regard these projects in general?
No, we don't have, I think, a specific issue with this one. So we are quite aligned with what has just been said. And it's not a real matter of focus for us now. The energy thing that I said before is a real one. And for example, what would be very interesting for us is to know if the Commission has figures on how many financial support has been deployed under this umbrella and how many companies benefit from where. Because again, as far as we are concerned, we face this crisis a little bit with our own tool. The companies are either passing the increase to the consumers when they can, passing this to their counterparts when they can. Otherwise, they are smashing their margins. And if we want to do the climate transition, we need to have equity to invest in technologies. And when we crash the margin, is the capacity of innovation and investment goes down. So for us, it's the real topic for now of focus is to know how this help, this support is deployed. For COVID, it's very good deployed. For the energy crisis, it's a little bit more difficult for us now to understand this.
Thank you. Maria, did you still want to respond to either the IPCEI or some of the other?
Yeah, I mean, of course, my comments on the IPCEI, in particular on hydrogen, are not necessarily as such state aid comments, but more in general. I place question marks with regard to the hydrogen hype. We do probably need a certain percentage of green hydrogen, which is hydrogen from renewable energy. But we only need that for difficult to abate sectors. That means, for example, the steel sector, which is a very difficult sector to decarbonize, and it's not easy to go immediately to electrification. So when we're then talking about these bigger projects, in particular, there's talk about EU hydrogen backbone, etc., so a large hydrogen infrastructure connecting various countries. I'm wondering whether we are not, again, maybe making the mistake of putting a lot of money into a project that is not necessary, rather than maybe looking at hydrogen from the point of view that we need maybe certain hydrogen valleys, meaning hydrogen locations which are close to these difficult to abate sectors, and rather focus on them and use the rest of this money in order to invest in cleaner, different solutions. So for me, there's always a little bit the risk that we are attaching we get very easily attached to these new technologies. By the way, hydrogen is a technology where, again, we don't know all the issues around it. We don't know how it's going to be function. There's also a huge risk of the so-called lock-in, meaning a lot of hydrogen might also be coming from so-called blue hydrogen. I don't like the colors because it gives a completely different image. And that is actually a hydrogen coming from abated fossil fuels. And these hydrogens can create a huge risk of gas lock-in because you will need gas in order to create this hydrogen. So I would really say I do understand that there is a need to focus on this in a certain way because we have a needed element, but I would really like to call on the member states and also on the Commission to take a little bit a step back and to focus on hydrogen only for the absolute necessary, and then wonder whether we need these kind of large European projects for this.
Thank you. Yes, I still, at the start of the conversation, the Siemens Alstom case dropped, and I was wondering if at the German Economy Ministry this prohibition still left traces, and how you find that the European Commission has responded after this case to, yes, the question of the competition with Chinese companies, and yes.
Okay, I understand that it addressed me. Yes, I mean, I think the position of the German government was made very clear at the time when the decision came, and I think I have nothing to add to that. I think we should more focus on what's lying ahead of us, and I think what's lying ahead of us are the challenges, the main challenges we have. This is as I said, the green and digital transition, and we have to also be very clear that we strengthen our industries and our companies for the international competition. So I think we should focus on that, and I think the Siemens Alstom case, I think everything what was needed to be said was said at the time, and I think now let's look in the future and in the problems we have on the table at the moment.
Yeah,
not on the merger, but just to mention that we are also working on a new instrument, the foreign subsidy instrument, which is for which we are very grateful to the French presidency of having pushed this very, very strongly during the mandate, and we are hopeful that very soon there's an agreement within Council and Parliament in the trilogues. And
do you believe that would still be possible before the end of the French presidency, which is approaching?
That would be my hope. That would be my hope. Let's see whether it materializes, but I think it's not impossible. Which would mean that we would gain with this an instrument which is somehow filling a gap, I think, in our toolbox, in order to look potentially at the impact of third country subsidies in mergers or in public procurement processes. There's also a third pillar, which is an ex officio instrument, but this would allow us to look into takeovers of European companies by third country companies if they have benefited from state support, and to see which role played the state support and what conclusions to draw from this. So I think this is a very important instrument, which is somehow adjacent to competition policy, and we're looking forward to this becoming a reality.
Thank you. Fabrice or Maria, do you still want to add something to what's been said?
Maria first.
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, great. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you to the panelists for their inputs, and may I Sorry, I'm just going through what I still need to say ahead of the end. So, sorry, please remain seated as the next session will begin in a couple of minutes. The next session will be a spotlight discussion on Europe's industrial ambitions, or how to remain competitive in a greener Europe, and it will be moderated by my colleague Carl Matthijssen. Thank you, everyone.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.